We're talking tight end strategy. You were listening to the Fantasy Football Almanac show with Sean Ryan and David G from Guru Fantasy World. David, how are you doing today, my friend?
What's up, man? I'm excited to talk tight ends. This is my favorite fantasy position right here.
Yeah, I know. This is, I think, a fitting, I guess. This is our first official recording of the Fantasy Football Almanac, although I don't know how the episode sequence because, you know, that takes some time. So this might be kind of a back episode depending on when people pick it up. But, yeah, man, I knew tight ends are your thing. You're a big proponent of the draft tight end early strategies we kind of teased last week. So, you know, I think the most fitting thing is I know we have a kind of a sequence. We want to talk about some top players. We want to talk about some breakouts. But I think, you know, let's you kind of run with the ship and say, you know, what are your thoughts on tight end strategy first and foremost? And then let's talk some of the toughest tight ends up at the top of the bracket there.
All right, well, I'm going to kind of set you up here, all right? So I'm going to pitch a question to you. How high do you think is too high to take Travis Kelce or George Kittle?
For me, I'm generally a guy that likes to wait until at least the third round. But
let me cut you off right there. Wrong answer. All right. I'm gonna tell you why Travis Kelce and George Kittle are both worth first round picks.
Whoa.
For me, I've always taken them round two.
Mm-hmm.
Early round two, I've been willing to go Kelce basically the past 3 years. Early round two. Haven't had a problem with it. I will say this is the year I'm more apt to pass on those two in round two and target Mark Andrews in round three because I really like Mark Andrews.
Right.
But if you have already decided you're targeting Travis Kelce in early round two, I think there's a major case to be made for targeting him late round one. And for me, it comes down to roster construction and the options that you have. If you're going running back round one and you plan on taking Travis Kelce round two and you don't feel as comfortable with George Kittle as you do with Travis Kelce, it makes sense to take Kelce first in the late first round and then get the running back. If you look at the running back options in the late first round, we have Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Miles Sanders, Austin Eckler, even Kenyon Drake. So it's kind of hard to differentiate between which running back is going to finish the highest out of those late round one, early round two running backs. So if you want Kelce, don't take a chance of someone taking him at the swing, pick 13, 14, first couple picks around two. Get him pick 11, get him pick 10. And then take whichever running back falls to you in round two.
I agree, and I'm big on is readers of the Fantasy Football Almanac. Oh, I should have put this up at the front for our YouTube audience and everywhere you're catching this. The 2020 Fantasy Football Almanac and Draft Guide available on Amazon.com. If you're worried about the season due to COVID, anybody who this guide comes with free updates. Anybody who purchases the guide and signs up for those updates. If the season's canceled, I'm going to automatically give you the updates for 2021 as well. So there's no worry there. You don't have to worry about the spending money on something that gets canceled. Deeper sleeper projection, all that stuff. But what that almanac is really big on is draft tactics. And so you kind of touched on something that I think a lot of people kind of missed the boat on. And I did this last year. I'm in for example, one-person keeper league, and it's kind of one of those keeper leagues where you get to keep the player at the draft position. So if you draft somebody in round 13 that you're going to keep the next year and that's your one player, you get that person at the round 13 value, which is, that basically rewards people who can draft well late. I had the swing. I had the last pick in the first round. So, every now and then I got 2 picks in a row. I wanted Austin Eckler. He was high on my list. I had the rounds 8 and 9 swing. I picked somebody else in round 8, picked Eckler at round 9 because I figured he had a chance at being a keeper this year, and that's exactly what happened. So now I have him at a round 9 value. Draft tactics, it's important, right? And so what you said about Kelce, you're sitting at round 10, and you're looking at your draft sheet, and you're thinking, well, I think Kelce is a cut above the rest at tight end, right? I think he's going to give you an extra 2 to 3 points per game. Not as stark as maybe Christian McCaffrey was at the running back position last year, where just the competitive advantage was off the charts. But you think Kelce gives me this much advantage. These running backs are all similar. You don't know how they're going to fall. Let me take Kelce now, and then I'm happy with any one of the next 4 to 5 running backs. You need to think about those things when you go into the draft. Is if I have the decision between this player and these 4 players, do I pop on this guy early, because I don't care which round of or these guys. And, I know a lot of people are probably listening to this thinking, oh, yeah, of course. But I would say people that think that way and prepare that way for a draft, I would say that's the minority, not the majority. For all these people. So it's something you got to think about. And that's why, the Almanac goes into these draft tiers, and they go into draft tiers by, PPR versus standard versus all this stuff as well. And, PPR versus non-PPR, that could shake up your tight end rankings massively. Kelsey is going to be at the top of my list and yours as well, no matter what. But there you go.
Yeah, I think it comes down to durability with the Kelsey Kittle conundrum. I mean, Kittle's great. He's just as good on a points per game basis, but you just look at the games missed the past 2 years. I think that kind of elevates Kelsey up into his own sort of tier where he gives you an advantage over the rest of your league mates that, George Kittle is just a little riskier with.
Right. Now, I'm going to hit you with something, too, talking about tight ends in the first round. Like I said, for me, tactically speaking, I know I'm a little bit old school, but I am kind of gravitating more towards a different way, which we've talked about with these, talking about eventually we're going to do like a fantasy football kind of mock draft and kind of go through and play out different scenarios. I'm gravitating more towards the idea of drafting the receiver and the tight end a little bit earlier just because they give you significant competitive advantage. And especially in a PPR league, you can find some running backs that'll produce late. But usually I draft first 2 to 3 rounds of running back and hope my league does the same thing and hope I can get a guy like you said, like Andrews. I'd be okay drafting Andrews maybe in the 3rd round. Certainly, yeah. If Kittle and Kelsey, I mean, come on, you got to draft. But there's no way Kelsey's slipping past the 2nd round. You might have a chance at Kittle depending on your league, although I think that would be a mistake to let him drop that far. You might have a shot. But yeah, I'm coming around. Go ahead.
I think the reason I like Andrews as my favorite tight end target in round 3 is just because the running back start seems really ideal this year compared to last. After round 2, it just seems like it's a major cliff. Once Austin Eckler and Miles Sanders come off the board for me, I mean, maybe Fournette. I don't love Chubb in PPR leagues. Yeah. I mean, even after those 2 guys, it quickly drops to like Gurley, David Johnson territory, and I'm not very comfortable.
Yeah, people are high.
Such risk-heavy guys like that.
Right, and you're talking. I know this is a tight end show, but you're talking about Gurley. I've seen some stupid projections. People have to understand that Todd Gurley is in Dirk Cutter's system. It's very rare for a running back to get volume, even in the passing game, in that offensive system. I'm not a buyer. I saw ESPN like right after that signing come out and say he's going to score 15 to 20 touchdowns. I'm like, what are you smoking, guys? Come on. Running backs, I think this year is interesting because I like a lot of the rookies. Like if I'm in a dynasty format, and I'm not, unfortunately. If I'm in a dynasty format, this is the year, even if I had a good team, I would trade those assets for early draft picks to reload. J.K. Dobbins is my favorite running back in the draft. I don't know if he's the guy in redraft formats this year. Jonathan Taylor I loved, and I just went back because of these free updates. I'm going through another update cycle in the book, which is going to be probably out by the time people are picking up the show, but I loved Jonathan Taylor. I loved J.K. Dobbins. I think for a Dynasty League, those are probably my top 2. Cam Akers, what do you think about Cam Akers? Side tangent here. What do you think about Cam Akers and the Rams? I love the opportunity, but he just, I don't know, man. There's something about his running. I don't know that he's the type of runner that McVay wants. So I see a little bit of risk there.
I do have not as good a gut feeling. I don't know, honestly, what I base it on with Cam Akers because I liked him and I liked the landing spot, but the offensive line – Daryl Henderson. I mean, they have other receiving targets to get the ball to. I think he's got a very wide range of outcomes this year. He could go completely crazy, and he could seize that 3rd down gig and basically be a workhorse. Right. But there's also major downside. Malcolm Brown and Daryl Henderson. It could be a 3-way committee. I mean, I think I'd probably, if we're talking running backs, I'd probably rather DeAndre Swift, even in like redraft leagues, than Cam Akers.
Yeah, I hear you. Back to tight ends. So the tight ends though. So again, another feature of the guide has this what's called PAR, points above replacement. It's like baseball's WAR, but it's just fantasy football points above replacement. There's algorithms that go behind it. Obviously, I'm not going to go into the math behind that, but again, back to your first round tight end strategy, and I'm just reading through some of these. The number 6 player in the league, because it normalizes all the positions together. Number 6 player in the league in points above replacement, Travis Kelce. Just behind Christian McCaffrey, by the way, who's number 5, and that's going to surprise some people. Travis Kelce at number 6. Number 7, George Kittle. So if you were to look at points above replacement in my draft guide, and that's not what I suggest doing, the way I suggest using it is look at that analytic, and when you're trying to make that decision, like how early do I draft a tight end, if you see that points above replacement is far and above away, like the point you were making earlier in the show, maybe like Josh Jacobs, then maybe you want to pop on him early, right? It's just more information to give you. But if you were to draft specifically on points above replacement, Kelce would be the number 7 player in the draft. And I don't think that would be a bad pick, honestly, if I'm looking at these things. And there are a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are some receivers that creep into that level. Usually you can do better in finding receivers later in that draft. But it's a lot at the top. And you know who the number 1 player is in points above replacement? Michael Thomas.
Really, huh?
Michael Thomas. Just based, and this is PPR. This is based on PPR, obviously, which is an interesting one. Tyreek Hill's up there. And it's funny because the running backs at the top score so similarly that their relative value at that position at the top of the draft is low. And then the running backs, of course, start to dominate kind of in the middle tiers. But does that translate to draft strategy? I would argue not. But it is just kind of a food for thought there. Is this the year, especially with, like we talked about last week, David, with COVID and all that stuff? Is this the year that maybe you want to dominate the other positions? And especially in a PPR format, do you want to maybe go after this rookie, roll the dice a little bit, go after a PPR specialist like James White now that Cam Newton is in New England? Everybody's still sleeping on James White, you know? Is this the year that you do that? I don't know, man. I want to get it. I can't wait to get into these fantasy football mock drafts and play out some of these scenarios because I'm really curious to see who I can get rounds 5, 6, and 7 if I go dominant on quarterback and tight end early.
You bring up another point, too, about I was ready to go there even before COVID, but it just kind of hammers it home with the coronavirus is leave drafting 1 tight end in the past. Leave it in the past.
Yeah.
You need to be drafting 2 tight ends in every single league. 1, because the coronavirus situation, you don't want to be lost without your starting tight end having no backup. And 2, it's starting to expand just a little bit towards the back end of the tight end pool that there are legitimate breakout options in those late rounds. You owe yourself the opportunity to hit on one of those guys, as well as paired with your starting tight end, because 1, it gives you depth and stability at probably the hardest position to find production at. And 2, if you hit early and hit late, you get crazy trade chip. Like last year, I took Travis Kelce in round 2. I took Mark Andrews late.
Oh, nice.
Week 3, people were just begging me for either
and let's
Kelce
be
or
honest,
Andrews.
Not everybody's league format allows it, although I think it's draconian not to allow a tight end to be flexed out. But most leagues, I think, today allow a flex tight end. My goodness, Mark Andrews is a flex, like a strong flex player if he's your second tight end.
I traded Andrews and Jarvis Landry, who I took in like the 7th round, for Chris Godwin after 4 weeks.
Oh, man.
So that's kind of my point.
Flip.
Like, wait on wide receivers. Make sure you're hitting on tight end. You can flip the wideouts. You can flip them easy. People, they see a tight end or a running back with a pulse, and they say, all right, I'll turn Godwin into Landry. It's a downgrade, but I got nothing at tight end.
Yeah,
so
right.
It helps me overall, and it did help that team overall. It helped us both. It was a win-win. So I'm a big proponent of drafting 2 tight ends no matter what.
And I know you have a list.
At least.
Yeah, sure. I completely agree. And I know you have a list of kind of potential breakouts, and we'll get there in just a second. But, you know, another thing, like I was talking about points above replacement, and I've been using this kind of philosophy. This is the first year I've published it in the book. I've been personally using it for about 15 to 20 years, you know, doing my own metrics. And I've been basically kind of testing it. Anything that hits the book has at least 3 years, usually 5 years of testing before it gets published. So I'm a big believer in it. I'm just not throwing stuff out there. But the way I like to use, another way I like to use this points above replacement is to find sleepers, right? It helped me identify Lamar Jackson last year. People that read my book will know this because when you sign up for the free updates, you'll know that I was begging people to draft Darren Waller in the last round of the draft. So he's going undrafted. Just wait, pick a kicker around early, pick the defense around early, and just pick Darren Waller in the last round. You'll start the run on kicker, you'll start the run, or at least be at the top of the run in defense, and then you get, I think, a weekly starter at tight end. That's exactly what happened, right? And so when I said earlier, like for me, do I draft a tight end early? Maybe this is the year that I do that, but usually I don't because I've always had success in drafting a late tight end or maybe even 2. But before we get there, because I think this is a great time to transition to that breakout section that we wanted to get to, a player that's coming back high on my metrics, which it's kind of causing a schism in my brain because I'm just like, I wanna downgrade him, but all of my information, my offensive system scouting, all that stuff is telling me don't buy into the hype that he's degrading, is Zach Ertz. And he's coming back. And look, I love Dallas Goddard, and that's the big risk. But everybody keep in mind for Philadelphia, I had a question about Miles Sanders this week in my email with my free updates. And I said, look, I like Miles Sanders. He was my favorite running back coming out last year in terms of talent. But Doug Peterson sometimes goes 4 deep at running back. You never know what this guy's going to do with running back. So there's always some risk there. Is he going to be the leader in the backfield? Yes, absolutely. But what does that mean? And I said, last year in Philadelphia for Miles Sanders, and this affects Zach Ertz as well. Last year, Philadelphia, Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, basically out for most of the year. And they were just trying to find any receiver who could run a route. Aguilar sucks, as everybody knows. Arcega-Whiteside just didn't pop his rookie year. Jury's still out on him, I guess. I know they added a receiver. But this year, the receiver's coming back in depth, depending on what Philadelphia does with Deshaun Jackson and his Twitter stuff. We won't even talk about that. I'm not – look, I don't know that Deshaun Jackson makes this roster anymore. But that's a very valid thing. But if he doesn't, does that help Zach Ertz? I think it could. But Zach Ertz is banged up. Last year, Philadelphia, just remember, on the weight, I think they finished 9-7, won the division. Their receivers are bad. They basically had Miles Sanders, Dallas Goddard, and Zach Ertz for some of the season because Ertz was banged up. They had 2 tight ends to throw to and a running back. And then, of course, Boston Scott kind of broke out as well. This year, they have the receivers back. They have more of the offense of what they want to do. That opens things up for Zach Ertz. So I think the opportunity for tight end will be there. But Dallas Goddard's really good. Is he going to eat into those things? So there's a risk there. My analytics love the position, but my eyes are telling me Dallas Goddard, he kind of asserted himself as more of a red zone guy. Maybe because all the attention was on Ertz. What do you think about that? I just thrown a bunch of Philadelphia Eagles at you with Zach Ertz, but how do you feel about the scenario there?
I think any risk, I don't know if I've heard anyone associate with risk with Zach Ertz until you right now, to be honest. I think
should be.
totally overblown to me because you talk about the wide receivers coming back, even if we give him Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson back and say Jalen Reagor's a good rookie, Ertz is still the number one. He's still the number one target in that passing game. And how many tight ends can say that in the league? We got probably Kelsey, Kittle, Mark Andrews, Ertz, maybe Darren Waller, maybe Hunter Henry, and I'm going to throw in one dark horse for leading his receiving course, maybe Chris Herndon. But that's about 5-6 tight ends who could be the number one option in their receiving game. So I'm not overblowing any concern about risk. I do love Goddard, but I still see Ertz as the number one number one option in an explosive passing offense. So I'm not worried about him at all. Yeah,
and to that point too, I do think Philadelphia, I mean, it's hard to remember, but the New England Patriots, when they had Gronkowski and Hernandez, before Hernandez's fall from grace and all that was shaping up to be a 2 tight end, very tough matchup offense. And I know back then, I believe they still had Welker back then. I mean, it's hard for me to kind of put those things. They might have even had some overlap with Randy Moss.
They did have Welker. They had Welker. It was before Moss, I believe, but they did have Welker, and then they had Deion Branch as their other wideout.
Yeah, and so, that 2 tight end offense, that was shaping up. Now, of course, as we know, Hernandez, he went to jail and is now deceased, and then Gronkowski became Gronkowski. But that was a 2 tight end offense, right? And I do think that Philadelphia's kind of moving because they found this identity and this thing that worked at the end of last season. And once they got a couple of wide receivers back on the roster, they won the division. And if Wentz didn't get hurt, they probably would have won that first playoff game too. So they were about to go on a run. Now with the receivers healthy, I do think there's a lot of balls to go around. And but I do think that the mouths will be fed there. And I do have Dallas Goddard in a PPR format as my 13th tight end. So that's a borderline.
Him higher.
You got him higher?
I got him, I believe, 10th or 11th. So I want to hit on that real quick because you talked about loving Dallas Goddard. I love him too, and I'm not worried about him being the second tight end on that team.
Right.
Almost always, any other situation I would be. But like you said, this is about as close to a Patriots Gronk Hernandez situation as we've seen in a while. And personally, I don't have any faith in 30-something-year-old Alshon Jeffrey coming back from Liz Frank. He's been hurt, banged up every year. Deshaun Jackson, don't even need to say anything about that.
Yeah.
Even if Jalen Reagor hits, We're talking about Dallas Goddard. He's the number 3 receiving option on this team. He could be the number 2 receiving option on this team.
I think he
if
will.
Jalen Reagor struggles to come along quick and Jeffrey doesn't bounce back from a list rank. So there's still significant upside. He was one of my late round tight ends I wanted to talk about here. So
there you go. Let's talk about
Jumped the gun on me a little bit, but let's look at this one thing that I have for the player index. If you look at tight ends through 2 seasons to have at least 91 receptions, 941 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns, which Dallas Goddard did, this is the list of tight ends through 2 years. Rob Gronkowski, Jimmy Graham, Aaron Hernandez, Evan Ingram, Chris Cooley, Jermaine Gresham, John Carlson, Antonio Gates, Mark Andrews, Dallas Goddard.
Yeah.
That's it. 10 guys. That is an extremely good list to be on of names. So I think he's talented. He's got the athleticism. He's got the draft capital. He was taken in round 2. He's got no wide receivers. He's got a high passing offense. I think everything lines up for Dallas Goddard to have a great year, even playing behind Zach Ertz.
Yep. I completely agree. And I'm looking through, and this is a great time to talk about some of these kind of lower. And that's was my point. I think 2 Philadelphia Eagles receivers could be season-long starters at the tight end position this year in all formats. I really do. And one of the things, again, the book that I do is every single week I chart plays. You know, I watch all the games. I have Game Pass. Usually I'm watching 3 games at a time, but I have Game Pass to clean up and watch like all the different games. And I chart plays. And Dallas Goddard was the red zone guy last year. Again, you know, there are different factors because I know people are double covering Zach Ertz, every time. Maybe that's not going to be the case. Maybe some of that shifts or maybe that evens out. So maybe that actually, as more attention gets over to Dallas Goddard, maybe some of that, those touchdowns go back Zach Ertz's way and he pops. But either way, I completely agree with you, and I argued that rookie receivers usually take a while, as we saw last year in Philadelphia with Arcega-Whiteside. Yeah, Reagor might not pop, and I would say
not right away at least.
Yeah, exactly, and I would say it's likelier that he won't pop. So I completely agree with you. I like that there. Why don't you give me another tight end, kind of with these dark horses on your list?
Well, first I want to say what I look for. What I look for is basically 4 factors. I look for athleticism. Hopefully elite. I look for draft capital. I look for offensive philosophy, a team that's hopefully passing the ball a good amount. And then I look for a lack of wide receivers on the team. And this kind of approach would have netted you guys like Mark Andrews last year, who was an athlete, draft capital, didn't have the philosophy, but had no wide receivers. Darren Waller, athleticism, no draft capital, but he had lack of wide receivers. So I kind of look for guys that have at least 2 to 3 of these things hit down.
When you say draft capital, are you talking about draft position in the NFL draft, like how highly drafted?
NFL draft.
Okay.
Yep. So some guys who fit the mold for me this year. Everybody's heard this name, but I'll hit it on again. Hayden Hurst.
Yeah.
This guy was a first round. He was taken before Lamar Jackson by the Ravens. All right. He wasn't really actually even bad in his first 2 years either. He just was crowded. Mark Andrews is a stud. It's hard going off next to Mark Andrews.
You know, about Hayden Hurst, I saw him his rookie year. Again, I watch the preseason games because that's big in terms of the free updates and all that stuff. That's the preseason updates are important. Like that was when I saw Christian McCaffrey a couple years ago. I think the first year of the publication, there was a time Christian McCaffrey wasn't quote unquote Christian McCaffrey. I saw him, Norv Turner taking over the offense back then. I was just like, oh my gosh, you need to draft him. I told everybody, I said, make sure you get him because he was a second round pick. Back then, if you can remember that it was only like 3 years ago, but there was a time Christian McCaffrey was a second-round pick. I said, get him as early as he can. I think I moved up to number 5, and he became Christian McCaffrey that we know and love now. But going back to tight end, I saw Hayden Hurst, and he just jumped out at me on film. I said, this dude is one of the more athletic tight ends that I've seen. He's going to break out, but like you said, there was just a lot of crowd there. That was back. Joe Flacco was still a quarterback at that point. It was a different kind of offense. Mark Andrews kind of took the reins, I should say, of that offense, and everything changed. Now, as soon as Austin Hooper went to Cleveland, I downgraded Austin Hooper because I loved him in Atlanta. We were talking about Todd Gurley earlier in Dirk Carter's system. Don't like the running backs there. Love the tight ends there. Love the tight ends. As soon as Hayden Hurst signed, I said, ooh, this guy, I'm going to be able to get him late, and he's going to be a year-long starter. I was thinking, I'm going to be able to get him in the last round like Darren Waller, but the hype caught up. So people are talking about him now. Nobody was talking about him early in the offseason. That was kind of an under-the-radar move. Love him in Atlanta. I think he's going to be better in Atlanta than Austin Hooper was for those Falcons. I think he adds a different layer in terms of his on-the-field talent. Where I think he got held behind in Baltimore is, Baltimore wants to run that ball, and he's not as good of a run blocker as Mark Andrews is.
Or Nick Boyle.
Yeah, or Boyle. And that's why he was there, but it's not because he can't be an impact tight end. So that's why I think people are sleeping on him. But, I think now the hype is starting to run off on him, and I think rightfully so. I'm going to even be moving him up in my rankings because I had him artificially low based on where he was ranked when I wrote the book. I'm going to have to bump him up because I think he's definitely a bankable year-long starter. You don't have to draft him the first 3 rounds.
He's got the athleticism. He ran a 4.6, 740.
Dude, he's
got
good.
The first-round draft capital. He's in an offensive system that was first in passing attempts last year. And then you talked about Austin Hooper. You think it'd be better. Let's talk about if he's worse. Even if he's worse, even if it takes some time to establish chemistry with Matt Ryan, let's talk about what his finish would be like. Look at Austin Hooper last year. 75 for 787, 6 touchdowns in 13 games. That's a 16-game pace of 92 receptions, 968 yards, and 7 touchdowns, all right? If you take 75% of that production, that's tight end 7 last year. You take 70% of that production, it's tight end 8. 65% of that production, it's tight end 9. 60% of that production is tight end 11. So if Hayden Hurst produces barely half of what Austin Hooper did last year, you're getting a starting tight end. So I think the floor is there. The ceiling is crazy high. Again, he checks all of the boxes: athleticism, draft cap, philosophy, except for lack of wide receivers.
Yeah, that is true. But he'll get volume, man. And I think as a route runner, he's going to be better than Hooper. I love him in Atlanta. Who's another guy on your list?
So we talked about Goddard. Another guy on my list is going to be Jonnu Smith, right? His combine was crazy. Let me pull this up real quick. He ran a 4.6 240, a 38-inch vertical, 127-inch broad jumps, and a 4.18 shuttle. So the athleticism isn't just great. It's borderline elite. He's got the draft capital round 3. Doesn't quite have that offensive philosophy, but there's no wide receivers on the team. You talk about he could be legitimately the number 2 wide receiver on this team, number 2 receiving option behind A.J. Brown. Corey Davis is there, Adam Humphries, Delaney Walker's gone, vacates targets. Dion Lewis gone, vacates targets. Tajae Sharp gone, vacates targets. They didn't add anyone to soak up those targets. They're going to have to go somewhere. Another guy, Mike Goseki, checks all the boxes. Athleticism, he was an elite athlete. Let's pull up his combine real quick. This one is...
While you're pulling that up,
makes my eyes widen.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up about Goseki, I was somebody who liked him last year because of the new offensive scheme. The kind of the Patriot offensive philosophy coming in last year. I know things are changing this year. Chan Gailey takes over at offensive coordinator there. Going back and looking through the systems over the years and kind of mapping the Miami Dolphins personnel to previous Chan Gailey offenses. Look, I like Preston Williams. I like Devontae Parker to be the guys there in the receiving game, but there are going to be opportunities for tight end in this offense. It's going to be even more improved. People were down on Goseki because his rookie year was with Adam Gase. And he just never really broke into the lineup. But Adam Gase is kind of a goofball. you really never know.
That's a kind way of saying it.
I know he didn't like Devontae Parker either. Remember,
he didn't like Kenyon Drake.
Yeah,
he didn't like Ryan Tannehill. He didn't like anyone.
He really doesn't like anyone. He doesn't like Le'Veon Bell either. He's kind of a goofball. But Goseki, he's going to have opportunities in this offense, and I think the optics and it's almost T.J. Hawkinson. I think has fallen into this trap too. Last year. Remember, T.J. Hawkinson only had 8 games with Matt Stafford, had a pretty decent stretch with him early in the season, got injured. In this offense, Darrell Bevell, don't think about where T.J. Hawkinson finished in terms of your optics. Think about why he finished where he did. And that's what their argument I made last year about Goseki, so I like him, but you pulled up his stats. Why don't you talk about him a little bit more?
Well, for Goseki, the combine was a 4.5 440, a 41.5-inch vertical. 129-inch broad jump and a 4.10 shuttle. Wow. So this guy is a freak athlete. I don't love him as a player because it doesn't seem like that athleticism kind of matches up as well as he is with a player. But you just look at the target competition, the fact they're probably playing from behind. he's got a lot of the factors that you look for in a breakout tight end.
It's funny. I'm looking at my rankings. We just touched on Jonnu Smith, T.J. Hockenson, and Goseki, and they're just boom, boom, boom in my rankings, kind of in that next tier of guys. And I have Goseki, then Hockenson, then Smith in my lineup. But again, those guys I think are all offer value. I know Hockenson, I kind of inserted him into your conversation there, but I do think that Hockenson came in with a lot of hype last year. And I'd said everybody, and readers of my book will know this, I said, pump the brakes. Like, look, he's not freaking Gronkowski, right? And like, everybody's like, hey, Matt Patricia, he's New England. Matt Patricia, he did not bring New England's offense over. This is a different offensive scheme. It's different, okay? So
I think it was the size, speed combo, too, that the blocking, the all-around, all-purpose type. People wanted to throw that Gronk, that high draft capital. People wanted to compare him.
They were
Gronk.
nuts. There's enough value. We're talking about a bunch of guys here who can start for your team. There's no reason to hype a guy like Kmet for Chicago. Not that I think he's getting a lot of hype now. In fact, I think Kmet, I feel like he's not getting enough hype given where he was drafted and how much this offense really needs a tight end, because everybody's so butthurt over what happened with the guy who's so off.
Burton.
Yeah, I couldn't even remember his name. He was so off my radar because he burned me that first year, and I think he burned everybody so bad that everybody's afraid of Chicago tight ends. But he could actually be a guy that goes completely undrafted, maybe even a waiver guy after the draft. Put him on your watch list and see how many targets he gets if there are preseason games or that week one, man. If he gets like 10 targets, pick him up because he's probably going to get 10 to 15 targets all season long. So
kind of like Noah Fant last year. It might not be great at the beginning of the year, but he might pick up a little steam, as he starts to settle in as a rookie. I'm looking more to year two in like a dynasty format. I like Cole Kmet.
Yeah.
But he's definitely someone to keep your eye on for sure.
Speaking of Fant, where do you have Fant? You have him high in your rankings?
I'm a little bit more worried about Fant this year just because Sutton, I think Judy's a legit talent. I think KJ Hamler's a legit talent.
Yeah. People don't talk about him as much, right?
They don't. And I'm really worried they're going to run the ball a lot. Drew Locke is going to his second year as a starter. He only started, 4 games last year? I mean, he needs to settle in. They don't have a lot of time to work together. They signed Melvin Gordon. They have Phillip Lindsay. They're going to run the ball. Those are 2 running backs who can catch, throw in the 3 wide receivers. I mean, it's going to be hard for Fant without an injury to really be a consistent starter in my opinion.
I have him down actually below Smith, Hockenson, and Goseki, and I actually have Devin Asiasi up there in New England, and especially probably I might even upgrade him a little bit with Cam Newton getting there, although I'm not sold on Cam Newton. Everybody is just giving him the keys to the franchise. I want to see what happens in camp first to see. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's personality fit. With New England, everybody was crazy over Antonio Brown when he signed there. We got 1 game, before he was cut loose. Let's just pump the brakes on Cam Newton and the New England Patriots Super Bowl talk. It is possible that Stidham still starts at quarterback. That's all I'm saying. But Cam Newton will see the field, regardless. But I'm pumping the brakes on that. I want to see. I don't want to hear the hype. I want to see it first. Any other guys here? I can probably close the show down a little bit here, but any other guys that we didn't talk about that you want to give us some love to?
I think it was just I mentioned him once, but didn't really get into it. It was just Chris Herndon. I love the opportunity there. We were so high on this guy after his rookie year. He had a great rookie year. He was the next big thing. And it just didn't come together in year 2. Started with the suspension, had the injuries, and everybody's off now. Nobody wants to get burned again because so many of us got burned by Chris Herndon last year. But you look at it, he's an elite athlete, had great rookie production. I think the only guys to match his rookie production of I believe it was 39 receptions, 500-something yards,
nice.
4 touchdowns, 8 yards per target. It was like Gronk, Hernandez, and one other tight end. I don't remember exactly who. But he had elite rookie production. And then you look at the wide receivers, Jameson Crowder, Denzel Mims, Perriman. These guys are complementary players, really. Chris Herndon could be the number 1 option in this passing offense. Sam Darnold's not bad. They're going to be playing from behind. I see he could be this year's Darren Waller, in my opinion.
So, I agree with everything you said. But I talked about it in the Goseki, when we were talking about Goseki before. Gase just worries me. You just don't know what you're going to get. But let me say some pro Herndon stuff, okay? So one of the things I do, not in the book, but on the YouTube channel, is I have this segment called the Fantasy Football Fallout, where I kind of go through who are the top 10 players each week. I have, the hyped players that kicked you in the nuts. I do all these different things. But what was interesting is while Herndon was out, Ryan Griffin was like the number one tight end, like 2 out of 4 weeks late in the season. Sam Darnold does like throwing to the tight end. So there is value there. Is he going to pass the Adam Gase doghouse test? I have no freaking clue, because I don't think you can project that, man. He's like, you just don't know what you're going to get. But if he gets the field, I think what you were saying, look, I like Jamison Crowder in a PPR format. I think he's a year-long flex player. His average draft position's ridiculously low for the PPR format. He's probably a flex 2 in a PPR league. But Jamison Crowder is not a red zone threat. Denzel Mims, I don't think you can count on that rookie receiver here being a red zone threat. Brashad Perriman, former first-round pick, he's not a red zone threat. His best games in his career were when 2 receivers were hurt in Tampa Bay. I think Herndon is, I don't even think arguably, I think he should be the number 1 red zone target when they get down there.
And let me throw in one thing real quick, too, about Adam Gase and the red zone. He was, I believe they were by far last place in rushes inside the 10. They were throwing the ball when they got close to the end zone.
Yep.
So that's another good thing for Herndon. And you mentioned Adam Gase, but I don't think that's always terrible for fantasy. Adam Gase is bad. That means the Jets are going to be bad. Their defense is going to be bad. The one thing holding it together is Jamal Adams. He wants out. So they're going to be playing from behind. Bad might be good for Chris Herndon. I don't think it's necessarily something to doom him over.
Yeah, yep. I agree there. We'll just his personnel decisions, man. Like you said,
I know.
This is the guy.
It's hard finding.
This is the guy that tried to ruin Kenyon Drake's career. He didn't. There's just a slew of people. That's why I say like running back in Miami. Talking about like Jordan Howard now, and the fellow that came over from San Francisco, I can't remember his name off the top. Breida. Don't think about Miami's running back situation last year. It's a different scheme, a lot of investment in offensive line. You're going to get a lot of value at running back. I think Jordan Howard is going to be it's going to be a little bit of a committee. That's what Chan Gailey does. Jordan Howard's going to give you a tremendous value on your fantasy football draft day. So again, do you draft that tight end early when you can get Jordan Howard late? You can. Like I can't wait. We're gonna do this fantasy football mock draft with scenario at some point, and we'll see what happens. So that'll be a fun segment. But there you go. I think that's a good episode. Once again, everybody, just a reminder: the Fantasy Football Almanac and Draft Guide available on Amazon.com. Free updates throughout the off season. You're talking about our different approaches and everything. It's all math driven, but I do watch a lot of film. If you haven't caught up. If for some reason coronavirus strikes and the NFL season gets canceled, I'll automatically, if you opt in for those updates, I'll automatically put you on the updates for 2021, so you don't have to worry about losing money or anything like that. And check the link below. There you go. Hey, man. Plug your Twitter and your blog real quick, David.
Yeah, if you guys want to follow me, you can just follow me at Guru Fantasy, WRLD on Twitter, and then you can go to gurufantasyworld.blogspot.com.
Yep, and I'll have his Twitter info in the show notes below as well, so you just go ahead and expand and make sure you give him a follow. I'm at TFS_Sean, also in the show notes below. Giving me a follow. Fantasy Football Almanac Show. We'll be back next week with something. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but I like that tight end discussion. It's a lot of fun. So thanks a lot, man, and go out. Have a great week, everyone.
You too. Later, man.